Hello, my name is Chris Gathercole. I'm from the Financial Times, head of the FT Labs. So 20 minutes is not really long enough to go into any detail about anything, so I'm not going to pretend. I'm going to go through no detail about lots of things, so apologies. But I do want to talk about all these things, so if you want to find me afterwards and we can talk through them in more detail. This echo is very weird. Yes, okay. Okay, go. Right. So, who are we? So, sorry, the talk is in 4 parts. Who we are and what we've done. Some suggestions for companies who are thinking of going into voice and audio. Some problems that we've experienced, and also some description of what I think is the future, which is interruptions. So moving right on. So the FT is a subscription news publisher trying to reach the global business community. We've got a website, we've got a newspaper, we've got loads of data. It's a very rich area to be working in for voice. FT Labs is a tiny, tiny team that sits outside of the formal project prioritization process, and I can't describe how lovely that is to not have to ask permission to do a project. I feel sympathy for the 99.9% of the world that have to ask permission. We are a subscription-led site, so we're not so much in the discoverability area. We are trying to be worth our customers' money. We're trying to be everywhere they are and any time they are. And that now includes audio and voice. Our readers' aims are at a very, very basic level, and lots of detail being missed here. They want to be informed, they want to be entertained, and they want to do research. And quite often, that aim changes in the middle of a session, possibly several times. And trying to design for that is quite a challenge. So a quick word on terminology. So I'm going to use the word audio, and I think other people have used this as well. Audio is the output. It is audio output from the device, possibly mixed in with video. The audio could be a human speaking, or it could be a robot voice speaking. Voice is the input. Voice is the speech recognition, turning it into a command and trying to interpret it. And that bit in the middle, that's the tricky bit. So, labs. Labs.ft.com is our blog. So if you want to see a large selection of our work, not all of it, but a large part of it is on that blog. We've done a variety of audio projects. So it started out with experimenting with human-voiced narrations of our articles to see if our customers wanted to listen to entire articles read out by a human. The answer is maybe. Sometimes, not always, but in certain niche circumstances, they really, really do. Whilst we were experimenting with that, out of the blue, artificial voices suddenly became really rather good. And it went from being teeth-gratingly awful inside 5 seconds to actually, you could imagine listening to long periods of text from an artificial voice. At the time we looked at this, Amazon Polly had just released, 10 very nice voices of a variety of different accents. It was lovely. It was a really pleasant discovery, and that's kicked us off on this whole audio and voice journey. So we then built a system that turned every article that was published into a narration by experimental voice, the experimental Amy, as it's now affectionately known. And that is now available, was available on the site to all customers, and that switched to being available as an A/B test, and we're getting very interesting feedback. This is a very basic proposition. Do you want to listen to the entire article? And the answer is, in some situations, yes, they do. A very lovely side effect of this project was we really antagonized Lucy Kellaway, who was one of our opinion column writers. When she heard that her article had been narrated by this robot voice, she kind of lost it a bit and demanded it be taken down, then listened to it, and then made it the subject of her next column, where she was describing how the voice is all right, but actually she feels quite secure and safe, and she's not going to have her job replaced by a robot anytime soon. But given that it was an article published on the site, it was automatically narrated by experimental Amy. So there was a very pleasing, surreal experience of the robot voice describing how this human wasn't going to be replaced by a robot. We loved that. We then moved on to looking at voice. So we've been experimenting with what the voice devices can do and what data and information we've got that we can push through the voice devices. So as a labs team, we've been experimenting with the possibilities rather than trying to build what is the definitive application for the company. With Google Home, we found it slightly easier to make progress, and we've built a game which is actually published in the store. So if you go, OK, Google, talk to Make Connections, you now may play the Financial Times game, which is looking at people mentioned in the news in recent articles, which exposes our data set of names. It's soon to be on the Echo Show. Also, in the meanwhile, we've been working on a bunch of projects internally that haven't been published, exploring various aspects. So one FT conversation was making it possible for a user to submit a comment on an article verbally. And the system will then interpret the text, notice you've sworn, warn you that you've sworn, and say if you insist on leaving the swear word in there, you'll be fined an extra 20p per comment, and then submitting it after that. We're not going to go live with that, but it was a very interesting experiment. We built a basic news app which simply reads the latest articles and allows you to search for topics. One observation has been that these voice systems are very complicated to keep an eye on to see if they're all working. If you've got a graph of possibilities, how do you know that every node in that graph is working? And so we've been working internally on building a test harness that would actually explode out through the graph and explore every nook and cranny to make sure it's all functioning properly, because we found it really hard to know if this thing is working, even looking through log files. We've been looking at transcriptions of converting video and audio into computer text, and we've been looking at the idea of authentication with voice, either using sound or the customer speaking some code words into the system. So, some suggestions if you're going to think about using audio or voice. Your text needs to be narratable. You might think you've got text that can be read out, but you haven't really, dash, 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 no visual structured formatting. That's what we had. Editorial decided in their wisdom to insert some nice structured text in the middle of several articles, and it is awful when it comes through the artificial voice. You need to be rigorous. That you can't have little FT subscribers can click here to receive first FT every day by email messages in the article being read out. It is truly horrible, and it's insidious. It is everywhere. You have to really focus on your editorial process to kind of remove this, and then have a major exercise to go back through decades of, I was going to say, lax editorial process. That's not fair, but it is a tough problem to crack if you've got a lot of content that contains arbitrary format like this. You also have to have narratable data. So one thing we discovered when we did the game was we wanted to have some kind of payoff. Like if you answered the question correctly or incorrectly, you would then describe the person that you had just talked about. We've got the data, but it's not in a form that can be read out. So we've got the data as fields in a database table. You have to then construct a story maker to read that out in some way. Even Wikipedia has got text, but you try reading that, you're going to have to do a lot of processing on that text to strip out all the noise to get to the point of it sounding right. And then finally, you might have a nice piece of data-rich text that you're going to give to your customer. This is hard, and we've discovered that this is not what we have not got. This is now a project to try and find a source of data that works well when it's read out. Yes, so two things to know about your customers. They know what they want, and they don't know what they want. I'll just move on. Don't seek permission from senior stakeholders. The reality is now much better than their fears. Instead, build a quick prototype and ask for their opinion on the prototype and ask for their input into the prototype. That is a fabulously positive experience compared to the worry that you get the other way around. So here's some problems. For audio, text-to-speech is good enough for sentences, easily good enough for sentences. It is not quite good enough for whole articles, and it's rubbish when the articles are full of nuance and humor and sarcasm and poetry and long lists. So you need to consider things like summarization. Our customer's going to want to listen to your entire piece of text. Summarization might be what they're looking for. And hybrids of human reading out the bulk of the text and then an artificial voice chipping in with supplementary information. and also audio plus video. That seems to be a good compromise of audio, especially for long lists. So problems with voice. So yes, we had to build something called the Barnier list. Every time Michel Barnier was an answer to a question, it crashed the app. We couldn't find out what was going on. We got back a corrupt response from the Google backend that just broke our system. We couldn't, was it Michel? No. Was it Barnier? No. Michel Barnier? Bang, it died. And there were several other names that we had to put into this list and strip out of the data for the game in order for the thing to work. We haven't revisited it. It's possible Michel Barnier is back in the land of the living. I don't know, but this may be apocryphal, but I understand that no one in Australia can use these voice apps. I don't know. Ums and ahs and hesitations, they can't handle that. It interrupts, it breaks the flow of the thing, and offices it is completely useless in an office. To develop in an office, you're shouting at the device half the time to get it to work, especially one of our team was part Scottish, and yes, okay Google, you think would be quite a simple phrase, but no. And especially when you get really cross and your face goes red and the veins are showing in your forehead. And there's dents in the wall where some of the devices have left their mark. So offices, it is really not good for offices. Long lists, they're bad for long lists, either as a set of options to choose from or as the answer to a question. You have to memorize the key phrases. At the moment, voice devices are the verbal equivalent of a large dashboard of buttons, and you have to remember the voice trigger to hit each button, and it's just not great. Awkward to start and stop, and they're uninterruptible. So, interruptions, I hear you say. Yes. So, this is the opinion part, where not much evidence to back it up, other than a strong sense of this aspect of voice devices would make them really start, I was going to say singing, but that's not right. It's really, really, really effective. The good news is interruptions is how conversations work. It's how feedback gets passed from listener to speaker and speaker to listener. An interruption doesn't mean stopping. It's a piece of information affecting the flow of the speaker. It's a much more useful, much more natural, richer mode of conversation. Bad news is the voice assistants can't do this. But I'll go on anyway. So, mode switching when you interrupt is intuitive. You don't have to wait for a pre-programmed point, a pre-programmed break in proceedings to then decide what to do. You can take control of the conversation. You can passive versus active is a very significant factor in engagement. An active listener is somebody who's engaged. They are paying attention. You've got them by the eyeballs, well, ears, tongue. You've got them. And they are, in this mode, more engaged than almost any other channel you might be pursuing. It allows for long audio lists. You don't have to wait for the list to end. The user can interrupt a list partway through and say, yep, that one, that's me. It allows multi-dimensional navigation where you can pivot at any point and head off in a different direction. The skill becomes an open-ended tool. So mention's been made of personas and what's your brand persona. So in a very unofficial way, we are sort of thinking about our brand persona in terms of our experiments being Batman's butler. We are trying to build Alfred, who is very quiet, but he hands you the information you wanted to know on a silver tray, the paper's ironed, and the important bits being circled. You know, that's the kind of metaphor we've got in our head that we're trying to build. You don't talk to Alfred. Alfred just knows what you want and gives it to you. The skill becomes a tool. We're not trying to build a friend, we're trying to build a tool that the users can start manipulating comfortably and do what they want and achieve what they want and not be held back by our own lack of imagination. It's an essential part of conversing. Interruptions are more than choose your own adventure, where you're in a maze of twisty passages. You see a sword, what can you do? Well, what can I do? Pick up the sword, put down the sword, turn left, turn right. You know, all those hard-coded actions are very limiting. It's more than a tape deck. Tape deck is on the way, where you can pause, you can play, you can go previous or next in a list. With interruptions, you can change the list, you can change the depth of the list, you can go off in different directions. So interruptions would allow for extremely effective user experience, and also, I'm happy to concede, some truly awful ones. So we're looking forward to, well, building both, really. So here's an example of what I mean by an interruption that would be effective. So you're listening to a long article. This could be a 15-minute long read. You're there for the duration, and it says Angela Merkel traveled to France on a visit. And you go, who is that? Okay, so who is that? You don't have to say, who is Angela Merkel? The system doesn't have to recognize that you just tried to say the word Angela Merkel. The interruption is who something. We've got enough information now. If we get told the timing down to the millisecond of when the user interrupted, we can track back through the text and say, right, the last person to be mentioned, Angela Merkel. What do we know about Angela Merkel? Here's some information about Angela Merkel. It's an intuitive switch. We don't have to tell the user how to do this. We don't have to tell them when. Right now is the time you need to make your choice. This is always available at any point. It kind of changes how you structure your skill. Instead of having a graph, I need to think this one through. I don't know what the metaphor is. It's not a graph, it's something else. You can pivot at any point. You can interrupt at any point. You can go back up the stack of what you've been doing. You can go down into more detail, back from detail. This is a tool. This is the user in full control of the interaction. Very high level of engagement. Interaction history. So with GDPR coming along, this is a very interesting dilemma now, because it appears that voice interactions with users encourages us to collect vast amounts of highly personal information about the users, like their wishes, how they talk, their speed, their cadence, the time of day they talk to us, what they said to us yesterday, 5 minutes ago, last week. A vast amount of data. But if we have that data, hopefully not in contravention of GDPR, we can then do really rich interactions. So if we know that you've already asked us about Angela Merkel, well, we won't give you the big summary, we'll give you the headline summary as a reminder, kind of, Angela Merkel, we told you yesterday. But if it's the first time you've mentioned Angela Merkel, we'll give you the full summary. It allows for a much more complex model. It also isn't possible at the moment because the devices don't support it. But in terms of technical details, all we really need is the ability for the voice device to respond to an interruption, please without the keyword, because that's just not the way people talk, and to pass back the precise timing of when the interruption happened. With those two aspects, we can do the rest, and we can then take this onto a very high level, because at the moment, the interactions are interesting, fun, hard, but really not very good. This would allow proper, deep interactions with users. And so, in summary, interruptions is the future. We are basically desperate for this to happen. And if anybody's listening out there who can adjust the priorities of their projects and put this interruption capability in there, we'd like to talk. This would build possibly the highest engaging channel that we have across all of our users. And as an internal thing, you need to be on top of your data, because it's a very subtle, wide-ranging issue. You need to have data that's clear of structured text, metadata that's narratable, summarization, and a good way of finding out what users want, even when they don't know what they want, because that's where we are with this technology. So. Thank you very much.